Hello, everyone. So today's workshop is designed with a very clear goal, and that is to bridge the gap between your excellent business or accounting skills and the communication skills you need to make those skills impactful. So we often hear that if you're in the business world, that you're just thinking about numbers, but the truth is that your career success will depend heavily on your ability to write clearly and persuasively. So, this session, we're going to equip you with practical tools you can immediately use in your assignments and future careers. Now, this activity is for two people. However, if you don't have anyone next to you, you can do this by yourself. Okay, so we're going to do a quick think where I want you to think about a time, perhaps in a student group or a part-time job, or even something you've heard in the news where financial information was misunderstood. So, what was the impact of that misunderstanding? I want you to have a quick think about like a minute or so and share a single word that describes the consequence. Okay, so I'm going to let you think about that, and you can press pause when you are ready with your word. Okay, so maybe words like confusion, loss, error may have sprung to mind. So if you chose any of those or any others, those are all valid. Now, the fact that that happens is highlighting the reason why we are here today. Okay, so I want you to take 2 minutes to write a brief response to this scenario. Now, this is a private exercise. Obviously, nobody will be able to see it. If you want to share it with myself, you're more than welcome to email it. I will share email address that you can reach out to me. Okay, so it's just going to help you measure your own progress through the session. And I want you to write how you would naturally explain the situation. Okay, so we're going to revisit concepts that you use afterwards. So let's get into it. What's our scenario? A scenario is that we are analyzing a company where the debt to equity ratio increased from 0.8 to 1.5. Okay, so what's the task? Your task is that you need to write 2 to 3 sentences explaining this to the Chief Financial Officer or the CFO. Okay, now you need to explain what's happened and you have to write it to this fantastic person. Now, I'm going to give you some time to think about it, and when you are ready, press play and we will go through some of the model answers and you can see which one matches yours best, okay? But definitely press pause now and give it a go, okay? Try your best, write in a way that is natural to you, and when you're ready, we're going to continue. Okay, so you should have some form of answers that you have written down, and I have various model answers. Now, the reason why I have more than one is that because we are all writing at different levels. Okay, so see which one is matching your answer. The first model answer. Remember, just to refresh your memory, we are analyzing a company where the debt to equity ratio increased from 0.8 to 1.5, and now we are checking out our answers. Okay, so first answer, the company is now using much more debt compared to its own money. This means the company has a higher financial risk. The CFO should look at why this happened. Now, I want you to think about this. This is very casual in its tone. Okay, so if yours match this, that's fine because this is just an activity for us. And it's basically answering the question. However, let's look at model 2 and see what's different. Okay, so model 2, the increase in debt to equity ratio from 0.8 to 1.5 shows the company is more reliant on borrowing. This higher leverage increases financial risk and could lead to higher interest costs. We should analyze the reasons for the shift. Okay, so slightly more professional, adding more information. Okay, it's also giving us an insight. It's saying the company is more reliant on borrowing. It's talking about increasing financial risk. Okay, and what's the implication of financial risk? Because we did mention financial risk in the first model answer. However, we are now adding in a correlation or what would happen due to the higher financial risk. And now this could lead to higher interest cost, okay? We should analyze the reasons for the shift. Now, the model answer, number one, looked at the CFO taking primary focus as looking at why the situation is happening. Now, model two is shifting it from that person, the CFO, and it's now taking ownership, as in we should analyze the reasons for the shift. Now, if you thought model two's answer was pretty good, hold on to your socks because I'm going to blow your mind with model three. Okay, so let's get into model three and what is happening here. So model three is I would like to highlight the significant increase in our debt to equity ratio from 1.5 up from 0.8. Now, I want you to notice that it's starting with where the debt is currently, okay? Both Model 2 answers, we would naturally begin at the lower, going all the way to the larger amount. However, if we want to write it with an impact, we will start with where it is currently. Now, let's go to the next bit. This indicates a substantial increase in financial leverage and risk. So it's putting the 2 points that were mentioned already and summarizing and putting them together, and it's giving us additional information which may concern investors, okay, and increased our cost of capital. So here we have a full-bodied picture. The increase is impacting in this way and will impact in or these people, our investors, okay? So it's showing us a whole overview of the impact of this increase rather than just saying, I've noticed the debt has increased from this to this, we need to look at it, okay? Now, obviously, when you have more information, you are able to add on. This was a theoretical scenario, so you are more than welcome to add in as much information as you wanted. Okay, so let's look at the last sentence. I recommend we review our recent financing strategy. So here it is a very strong recommendation. It's specific departments rather than in our first model answer where there was no alluding to where we should look. Instead, CFO should take charge. Second one, we are like, we should analyze. There's no clear direction. However, with the third model answer, we are looking in a specific direction, in a specific department, okay? So that's a lot of information that we have packed in to our answer. Now, let's see how we can do that if we haven't done that already. All right, so this is a reality check. Your degree and your technical knowledge are basically your ticket in the door to the company. But I mean, to advance, to grow in your position, to go into upper management, you must be able to communicate complex data clearly. Okay, so have a look at this list. We got financial analysis reports, client advisory memos, audit findings, management recommendations, compliant documentations. These aren't just assignments, they're going to be the core documents of your profession. So even though you may say, oh, I know how to do an assignment, I don't see the importance of it maybe, but learning those skills will help you moving on into your career. So basically, your poor writing doesn't just mean a lower mark. So in the professional world, it could lead to poor business decisions, financial loss, and unfortunately could affect your professional credibility. Okay, so we want to make sure when we are we're writing clearly, we are making making people aware of the information we are trying to share with them, and everyone is clear. Okay, so today we're gonna work with this three-pillar framework. Okay, so it's a simple three-part formula, and it's basically made up of number one, which is your audience. Okay, crafting the right message for your reader. Who is reading what you have written? Most of the time, or currently, it's now your lecturer. However, when you progress from university, you will be in a corporate job or you'll be working in finance, and that audience will change. Now, the second one, I'm not being rude when I say this, but it's called so what. Okay, and this is the most important tool for adding value and showing impact. So that's basically looking at the data you have, the interpretation, and then the following action. Okay, so you could use words such as this means, therefore, in a bridge. Now, the third pillar is evidence. Okay, now how to sound professional and credible. So basically show, don't tell, and it builds your credibility through precision. Now the last one is BLUF, and it's not spelled the way you'd normally spell bluff, but it's a BLUF principle, and that is bottom line up front. Now, this framework will basically help transform your writing from simple reports into a powerful analysis. So I'm just going to give you an example of BLUF, and I'm going back to our model 3. So it is your bottom line upfront. So when we started our answer, we started with 1.5. We mentioned that first because that's where it's sitting at currently. So your bottom line, and then we talked about it increasing from 0.8. So start with where you are currently when you are writing. Okay, so let's dive into our first pillar, and that's audience intelligence. And here's a quick exercise. So you found an inventory error, and I'm showing you two different statements, okay? So I want you to decide which of these two statements, statement A and statement B, will use for the reader A, who's warehouse manager, and reader B, which is the chief financial officer. Now, I want you to notice the language differences. Statement A uses very simple, concrete words, unit, counted, warehouse. Statement B uses more technical, abstract terms such as variance, material misstatement, adjustment. Now, the audience will change everything. So I'm going to read them out, and then I'm going to go to the next slide, and hopefully you have chosen your answer. So statement A, 15% inventory variance indicates potential material misstatement requiring adjustment. Statement B, the system shows 1,000 units, but we only counted 850 in the warehouse. Hope you've made your choice, and let's get on to the next slide, which will reveal our answer. So, the statement A, your warehouse manager, that's basically, just go back slightly, warehouse manager would be statement B, okay? And chief financial officer would be statement A. So let's look at why we have chosen that, because for non-accountants, we're going to use simple, concrete language, okay? Going to focus on the practical implications. The warehouse manager needs to understand the physical problem to fix it, while the CFO needs to understand the financial and the reporting implications. Now, the warehouse managers thinks about things they can physically control, such as physical counts and assistant counts, where the CFO is thinking about financial impact and accounting standards, okay? So that's what you need to remember when you are writing. Adjust your language to match the reader. Now, the key question when you are writing is always, what does my reader need to know to make a decision? So if they are the warehouse manager, they need to know what's being counted against what's being reported. Okay. If they're the CFO, they need to understand the financial impact and then how that matches up to accounting standards. So you would write accordingly. You wouldn't give the the warehouse manager financial impact decisions or analysis, because that wouldn't make sense to him, okay, or her, or them. It wouldn't make sense to them. However, you adjust your tone of writing. Okay, so basically, this is like I like to call it a cheat sheet. So these sentence starters are not a crutch. They're basically your building blocks of professional communication, and they're really helpful for building fluency in professional English. I would encourage you to use them in your assignments. So let's write as we are writing for a non-expert, okay? So when you're writing to somebody who's not an expert in your field, for example, myself, if you're writing to me about an accounting principle, you would use, so this means, and then explain what is happening in a simple term, and then you provide me with a clear action. So therefore, we should. So I can understand what is happening, and I understand what's the next step. Okay, so you're giving me an overview, and then you're giving me a clear direction on what should happen. Now, if you're going into the experts in your field or your fellow colleagues, you would use different language. And an example of this is the metrics suggest, and then your interpretation of what you've just witnessed or seen, and then the impact. So this impacts and then the area of business and requires specific action. Okay, so you see how it's slightly different for me, a non-expert in the business field. You would keep it very simple and you would follow with very direct actions. For an expert or somebody in your caliber, you would explain the whole process. You would interpret the process. You would tell the person reading it the impact that this action is having, and then you are going to give a very specific action. Okay, so if you are using the BLUF method, which is bottom line up front. Okay, I hope you remember that. So bottom line up front. So how would you phrase that if you are using the BLUF principle? So then you would start off by the key issue. What is most pressing? And then address that. We recommend immediate action on this. And the next one, immediate action is required for. So if you want to use some hedging phrases, you could use some such as this may indicate. Now remember, your hedging phrases are used when you are trying to be you're trying to direct without being 100% certain. You say this could happen, this may happen. You know, there isn't a specific analysis on it. So you just want to inform them of what you've noticed. Okay, so hedging phrases such as this may indicate, the data suggests, it appears. All right, let's look at the next slide. So pillar 2, again, not being rude. So what? Okay, so this is basically looking at the so what strategy, and it's the heart of adding value. Okay, so we're going to look at a weak statement. I have very nicely labeled weak statement for you. Operating expenses increased by 15% this quarter. Okay, now you may say, Christine, that's a great sentence. And I agree, that is a great sentence. But it is a fact that is useless on its own. Okay, so what type of operating expenses? Which quarter operating expenses? Which year? What are we comparing it against? Last year's quarter, 2 years ago's quarter? It doesn't have a lot of information. It's a very general fact, standing alone by itself, and it's a bit lonely, if I may say. So let's go on to a strong statement. Okay, and let's read it out. Operating expenses grew 15%, and that's pretty much that, outpacing revenue growth of 5%. Now, this compressed our operating margin from 12% to 9%, reducing net profit by £150,000. That's a lot of information in how many sentences? 1, 2. And that's one sentence all by itself. So let's get into what makes a strong statement strong. Because I could just put strong statements and you'll be like, okay, that's a strong statement. But let's get into the minute details of it. So the strong statement is basically connecting your data points and it's explaining the implication. It's answering the question every manager is thinking, so what? Okay, operating expenses increased 15% this quarter. So what? What does it mean for me? What does it mean for my department? What does it mean for the whole business? What does it mean for this quarter? What does it mean for this year? Okay, so it's basically what information, what does this information have, like, what's its impact? Okay, so now let's go back to our strong statement. Notice how it's linking growth. Notice how it's linking expense growth to revenue growth. Okay, so here we have expenses are growing and it is linking your revenue growth also. Okay, now it's basically showing the impact on the margin. It's quantifying the profit loss in pounds also. And this is basically your difference between reporting and analyzing. Okay, so this is a much more chunkier writing. It's only 2 sentences, but much more detailed, and you're giving an overview. So I'd like to say using the so what question is a simple trick to improve your writing. So after you state a fact, use phrases like this means, this suggests, as a result, therefore, to force you to explain the importance of your facts. Now, this will help to make your writing so much more helpful. So the magic question always is, what does this mean for the business? Okay, so tie in your facts to what does this mean for the business? Okay, so let's practice. Your task is to make this boring fact interesting and useful. Remember, you can ad-lib, you can add on extra information that may not add on. We just want to practice using it. So use the simple 3-step formula that's here, okay? And let's go with the first step. First step, 1, state the fact. That is your original sentence. And your original sentence is operating expenses increased by 15% this quarter. So start with stating your fact. Then explain the meaning. Okay, so you could use this means such and such and such. And step 2, give a recommendation. Use therefore, we should, I suggest, okay? So suggesting what the company should do, okay? So I want you to try and write this. I'll give you about, well, 3 minutes should be enough. And then when those 3 minutes are up, you press play and you listen to some of the answers. Okay, so don't take too long to write it. And remember, the model answers are just there as a guide. They may not necessarily match yours, but they're there as a guide. Okay, so press play when you're ready, and you can press pause now and get started. Okay, so you are done with your answers, and I got 3 types of answers here, okay? And the reason why I like to have multiple answers is because we all write differently, and sometimes you may see something in the good answer that may reflect yours, or the better, or the excellent, and you just have a little bit of all 3 in yours, okay? So let's have a look at the first one. So the first one is operating expenses increased by 15% this quarter, and that is stating the fact. Okay, now this means, so what? What does it mean? This means our costs are growing faster than our sales. Our recommendation, therefore, we should find ways to reduce unnecessary spending. And that is a good answer. It's solid. It encapsulates all of these 3-step formula that we have used, stating the fact, explain the meaning, give a recommendation. How can we amplify that even more? So let's go into the better one. Let's read it. So operating expenses grew by 15% this quarter. Fantastic, stating the fact. This is a concern because it reduces our profit margin. So you do see how we are comparing our operating expenses with our profit margin. Okay, now the recommendation, we recommend a department by department review to identify the cause. Okay, so here, this recommendation was a bit vague. It was saying, okay, we should just kind of find ways to reduce unnecessary spending. This review is looking at it as department by department review. Okay, so it's a bit more specific. Now, the excellent model answer, let's have a look at that together. The 15% rise in operating expenses this quarter has directly compressed our profit margin. Now, this first sentence is stating a fact, but it's also incorporating the BLUF method, which is bottom line up, front first, okay? Or up front. So it's mentioning the 15%. It's starting with that. And it's also done what the beta has done, because the beta is talking about profit margin, but that's in the second sentence. Now, this model answer has the BLUF method in it, and it is incorporating the comparison of operating expenses and profit margin and placing it all in one sentence, okay? It doesn't read too chunky. The 15% rise in operating expenses this quarter has directly compressed our profit margin. So already from these two lines, we have compressed them into one line. Now, let's look at the second sentence. This suggests inefficiencies in our cost control. So here it is pinpointing to cost control and saying there is an issue in this area. And let's look at the recommendation. We advise an immediate spending freeze on non-essential items and a full operational review. So it's telling you what to do now, saying freeze non-essential items and then have a full operational review, okay? So it's going in with immediate action as a recommendation, and it's telling you what it wants to look at in the future, okay? So you can see the difference. They're all conveying pretty much the basic fact. And the fact is operating expenses increased by 13%. But the level of detail and the level of communication is very different from answer to answer, okay? Now, this gives you a quick overview of what the impact of the rise in operating expenses has. Well, this is just stating there's been an increase and very little else is mentioned. Okay, there's very little so what in that. The so what gets a bit better, but here we're able to see an overview. Okay, so now this is the standard we are working towards. I have here from an actual analyst reports. And it's got a lot of terms that I'm not familiar with, but we will read them out together. Q3 EBITDA margin compressed 220 bps YOY to 18.5%, primarily due to inflationary cost pressures in raw materials. We expect margins to remain under pressure through Q4, necessitating price increases to maintain profitability. Whew, quite a lot of information there, okay? I would say there's tons of information and it's packed into two sentences. So I want you to notice also how it moves directly from data into business. Okay, it's not just what this has happened, but what this means and what should happen next. So this is ultimately the model for your own writing when you are moving into the accounting world or business world. This is how you should be writing. Okay. So it has specific metrics, has a clear cause, has forward-looking, and of course, concise professional language. Okay, so our third pillar is about sounding like a professional. So if you're in the business or accounting world, your opinion is less important than the evidence. So we avoid soft subjective language like I feel. Instead, we will use strong evidence-based language that points directly to the evidence. Now, however, accounting does often involve judgment and estimates, and that's when we use hedging. Okay, in hedging language, words like may, could, suggest, and it's not being weak, it's being accurate and professionally cautious, which is what auditing standards require. Okay, so if you become an auditor, you would use a lot of hedging. So, I know we did, like when we were writing, we were using I in the beginning, but generally we want to focus on apologize. Can't find that example I was looking for. Okay, so here it is. I do apologize. I feel like we think. We did use it in our example, but I would advise, we recommend, we advise. Okay, so that's hedging there. It's also using we expect. So even though they do sound similar, I feel like we think it's best to use hedging words, okay? So instead of saying we think, you could use we advise, we recommend. Okay, so it's not your personal preference coming through. I think there was one more. Yeah, we recommend. To any others? Okay, that's just it. Okay, so back to that again. So avoid subjective language such as I feel like, this is negative, this is positive. We think that this could have a big impact. It seems like such and such and such. Okay, so move away from that. Instead, use evidence-based language. The data indicates, analysis shows, the 15% variance. Maybe this will obviously change this percentage based on the variance. Okay. And if you have uncertain situations like we demonstrated here, we expect is also an example. This may indicate, could potentially lead to, appear to suggest. Now, learning these specific phrases is like learning the grammar rules, okay? So I would encourage you to practice using the data indicates instead of I think. And it's a small change to make you sound more authoritative and credible. And remember, hedging words like may and could are essential for being precise when you are not 100% certain, because they will be areas in your writing that you're not 100% sure, but you need to mention the data. So using correct words will be beneficial to you. Okay, so we're almost at the end, and I want you to redraft an accounting paragraph. So we're going to be editors, and here's a paragraph that unfortunately is quite common. Without giving too much away, I would say it's vague, it's informal, and no insight. So I want you to rewrite this paragraph using our three-pillar framework. Okay, just revising. Framework 1 is audience intelligence, or who is it meant for? Number 2 is, forget that for a second, the so what strategy. and our pillar 3 is evidence-based language. Okay, so just quick refresher. Pillar 1, audience. Pillar 2, the so what strategy. And pillar 3, evidence-based language. Okay, so let's go back and improve this. So we looked at the financial statements and noticed some things. The cash flow isn't great and there are some problems with customers paying slowly. The company made more money, but expenses are up too. And we should probably do something about this. Okay, now this is one way of communicating. However, we want to rewrite this with our 3 pillars: audience, so what strategy, and using evidence-based language. Now, notice the weak phrases, like in the original, if you want some hints. Notice some things, isn't great, probably do something. I want you to take these phrases I've just mentioned and replace them with really specific, strong language, okay? So when you are done with that, I would say take about 4 to 5, oh, take about 2 minutes. I was just giving you extra time. Take about 2 minutes to rewrite that and press pause. And when you're ready, press play and we can look at some answers together. Okay, so what you should be doing is incorporating the formula that we just used. And the BLUF method is used despite revenue growth. Deteriorating cash flow from the operation requires immediate management attention. Okay, so that is your bottom line up front. Then your evidence, what information have they given us? While revenue grew by 8%, operation cash flow declined 12% due to, and you could put in that I just have trade receivables days increasing from 40 to 55, inventory turnover slowing from 6x to 4.5x, and then a so what in action. So this working capital inefficiency has increased our borrowing needs by 500,000. We recommend stricter credit controls and inventory management protocols. Okay, so that's how you can rewrite it. When you are moving forward, I want you to have a look at the action plan. Okay, so there are some things for you to look at. And these are basically the following. 3 things to start. So you got your 3, 2, 1. Okay, 3 things to start. Use BLUF in all professional emails or any engagements you have. Bottom line up front. Okay. Now, always ask so what after stating data. And it does give me a tickle to say that, but you know what I mean. State your facts and then what impact does that data have on the business, on the company, on the department, okay? And then use a formula card for your next assignment. And you know, if you've forgotten which formula card, it's going to remind you this formula card, okay? Stating the meaning, explain or state the fact, explain the meaning, and then give a recommendation. So that is the formula card that I would like you to use. And I hope you have that stored. So 2 things to stop. Hiding your recommendations at the end. I know sometimes when you write reports, you want to save your recommendations all for the bitter end. However, try and incorporate them into your writing as you go along. It will sound more natural. And of course, follow your assignment guidelines. If your assignment says keep all recommendations for the end, then do so. Okay. Stop using I think and I feel, of course, in your formal writing. And One commitment to make. I will use peer review checklist to review classmates' work. Okay, so you can use the formula card as your checklist. So don't let these skills just stay in this room that you're watching this presentation on. Start small this week and then commit to using the framework in your next big assignment. Okay, so thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Christine. Here is my email address. Please reach out to me if you would like any assistance or guidance with academic English writing. Here is the YouTube channel. Please scan, like, and subscribe. And I hope this session was informative. Thank you.